Okay. All right. I would like to discuss, we'll focus on Lag BaOmer, but also about Sfiras Omer, which is a mitzvah included in this week's Sedra. But we'll start with Lag BaOmer. Lag BaOmer is a very strange holiday. It's a holiday that's shrouded in mystery. In fact, some of the Nosei Kalim, some of the Mefarshim, some of the Poskim, when they talk about Lag BaOmer, they talk about it as a holiday me'ezatam, a holiday that was for some reason. They don't even mention what the reason is. It's almost either they were trying to keep it a secret, or they were baffled and didn't know what the reason was for the holiday. And so the question is, what is the purpose of Lag BaOmer? What is the holiday of Lag BaOmer? And why do we celebrate that holiday? Now, today, it's popularly associated with the death of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. And that probably can be attributed to the strength of the movement that were led by the Kabbalists, those that were involved in Kabbalah, the Ari. However, we find other reasons mentioned for it. And the Chassam Sofer suggests, and if someone could question whether the date is exactly correct or not, but the Chassam Sofer suggests that Lag BaOmer was the day that the mun came down. So we are celebrating in a sense, we're celebrating the mun coming down to offer sustenance, that served as sustenance for the Jewish people in the desert. The only real problem, while the explanation is a very rational explanation, the only problem I have with it is that it's difficult to understand as to what the reason is that it was sort of kept quiet. Reasons that were controversial, that might have to do, that might offend Roman authorities, we could understand as to why the holiday was kept, the reason for the holiday was kept a secret. But if we say that it's because of the mun coming down, the Jewish people getting sustenance in the desert, so one has to question why was it the reason shrouded, hidden for generations? And another reason given is because the students of Rabbi Akiva died during the Omer period. That's a Gemara in Yavamis. And in the Medrash, it says, at pros hachag, that they died until about 15 days before Shavuos. So there is an assumption that they stopped dying, or the final day of death, whatever it was a Lag BaOmer. So there is, in a sense, a celebration that the students of Rabbi Akiva had 12,000 pairs of students, 24,000 students, and they died from Pesach till Shavuos, and according to some opinions, they died till Lag BaOmer or till the 34th of the Omer. There are different opinions, and when they stop dying, that day is considered a holiday. Okay, that also is somewhat difficult because we had many great tragedies that took place throughout the history of the Jewish people. And when these tragedies came to an end, we do find days of mourning associated with these tragedies. But we don't really find holidays that were associated with the end of these tragedies, at least holidays that were observed for generations. You do find that in certain communities that when they had a salvation, when there was a threat against them, that when there was a threat against them, and the threat was removed. So they proclaimed it. It was called a local Purim, a Purim for that specific town. And each town celebrated in a different manner. Some towns, the Sam Sofer mentions that some towns, when they had a miracle that occurred that prevented, let's say, a massacre from taking place, so they would say Hallel on the anniversary of that event. That would probably be somewhat controversial today. But so there was an idea of celebrating for the preventing a catastrophe. But the idea of, because the catastrophe came to an end, that we don't find that throughout the generations that there were such celebrations. And then, of course, you could say Hanukkah, but I'm talking post the Beis Hamikdash. Now, how did the students of Rabbi Akiva die? According to the Gemara, the students of Rabbi Akiva died. The students of Rabbi Akiva died because of Askara. I think some say it was diphtheria. It was a magefa. It was a plague. Probably has special meaning to us today. And they died from diphtheria. There is Igeris Rav Shir Goen. I'll come to it later. It's very strange. It goes against the Gemara. Maybe there was a different girsa. Maybe he held that it was dependent upon a machlokes. I don't want to go into that today. My father had all kinds of theories about it, but the Gerish Rav Shira Goen says they died b'shmada. They died in shmad, and that would imply that they were either killed or executed, rather than dying from an illness, as is mentioned in the Gemara in Yavamis. But whatever it is, according to many mefarshim, according to many opinions, not all opinions, but according to many opinions, they died, they stopped dying on Lag BaOmer. Now, a similar opinion, but even stranger, is the opinion of the Maharisigo. the Maariv, it's brought down by the Maharil. The Maharil brings down that actually, as the Gemara says, they died from Pesach till Shavuos. But there were individual days that they stopped, that they did not die. And somehow these days coincided with the days that Tachanun was not said. And it turns out that they died, so it turns out that they died approximately 33 days, and they stopped dying on the for 33 days. So on the 33rd day, which represents, I guess, in the daytime period of it, which represents the end, days equal, we take the amount of days equal to the days that they died, even though they didn't die in all those days. And when that amount of days comes to an end, we make a celebration. That really has to be understood. And then another reason suggested, I've seen it brought down, that Bar Kochba, who announced his revolt against Rome on Lag BaOmer, or the message reached the people on Lag BaOmer from Bar Kochba that he's initiating a revolt against the Roman occupiers. Now, we all know that revolt ended in disaster. So the question is, why would we celebrate the initiation of a revolt that ended not only in a defeat, but in a disaster? Now, and there is another question that I would like to raise. It's not a strong question. Many have raised that question in regard to the celebration of Yom HaAtzmaut. I want to turn that question to Lag BaOmer. There is a discussion in the Gemara in Tainis and the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah about whether Butla Megillas Tainis or Lo Butla Megillas Tainis. So let me explain what that means. During the second Beis HaMikdash, the Jewish people, every time there was a victory or a salvation or whatever it was, so they proclaimed the holiday. For the most part, the holiday was somewhat limited. The holiday manifests itself in not proclaiming fasts on that day, because in earlier years, whenever there was an impending catastrophe, whether it was a famine, whether it was pestilence, whether it was impending war, so the people would fast and asking God for help. So the question is, why is it? But when so they had a whole list of holidays, and you weren't allowed to fast on those days, and also you were not allowed to give a hesped, a moving, emotional eulogy for a person who died, in order to recognize the significance of the day. And there is a dispute in the Gemara as to whether after the Churban, after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, these holidays came to an end, or no, that that the holidays continue. We paskin, we conclude that with the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, these holidays lost their significance, and consequently, these holidays cease to exist as holidays. The only exceptions for special reasons were Hanukkah and Purim. Hanukkah and Purim continued to be holidays. And the question is, then the Gemara says, how could you say that these holidays came to an end? But we know, the Gemara says, that after the Churban, new holidays were enacted. And if new holidays were enacted, certainly they did not make the previous holidays, the holidays that existed with the events before the Churban, commemorating the events that existed before the Churban, they did not make these holidays not valid anymore. So the question is, so we see from the Gemara's question, so the Gemara answers that no, these holidays were not made after the Churban, they were made before the Churban, and these holidays ceased to exist in the same manner as all the other holidays before the Churban ceased to exist. So the question is, but we see from the Gemara's question that just like all the holidays that existed before the Churban, before the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, that existed during the Second Commonwealth, came to an end, ceased to exist, no longer had validity. As a result of the Churban, certainly new holidays could not be proclaimed after the Churban. And because of that, the Pri Chodesh says that, you cannot proclaim new holidays today. And the Pri Chodesh was very much opposed to the local Purims, even though it's mentioned in Shulchan Aruch that various towns, various cities would have their own Purim in addition to the regular Purim because of a miracle that occurred in their town. The Pri Chodesh says, after the Churban, after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, we are no longer able to proclaim special holidays. It's very interesting. I remember as a boy, I used to read some of the magazines that were sponsored by the I would call it anti-Zionistic sects of Orthodox Judaism, and they would write constantly. And I've seen it in Sfarim, even with people who identified with the Zionistic movement, that you cannot proclaim a holiday today. And they would write against the observance of Yom HaAtzmaut on that basis. Now, and this is in consonance with the opinion of the Pri Chodesh. But as I mentioned, it's clear from the Shulchan Aruch that we do not follow the opinion of the Pri Chodesh. But that is the opinion of the Pri Chodesh. The Maharam Alashkar, he was of the opinion that we can proclaim new holidays today. So the question is, what does the Maharam Alashkar do with the Gemara and Tainis and Rosh Hashanah that seem to imply that after the Churban, we cannot proclaim new holidays because of the Churban, because of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. And I think there's a very simple answer, and I didn't see anybody should say it. And I almost wonder, now, by the way, the Chassam Sofer agrees with the Maram Alashker, but he says something somewhat strange. He says it's dependent upon a machlokes, but the Chassam Sofer says the non-observance of holidays, the non-institution of holidays after the Churban, that's only about holidays that have to do with Yerushalayim, with Jerusalem. But holidays that took place for events, commemorate events that took place in other cities, one could institute new holidays. Okay, it seems a little strange. However, I think there's a very simple answer. And the simple answer is, the Gemara doesn't say, and the proof is the Rambam should have mentioned there is a prohibition of instituting new holidays in Hilchos Tainis. In Hilchos Tainis, the Rambam discusses all the halachas for commemorating, for remembering the Churban, how you have to leave part of your building, your house, not finished, how when you set a table, you leave something off the table. All kinds of halachas to demonstrate our sadness over the Churban, over the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Why doesn't the Rambam in Hilchos Tainis say we cannot proclaim new holidays? Obviously, the Rambam felt there was no such halacha. So the question is, if there is no such halacha, so how do we explain the Gemara that says, if the old holidays cease to exist, how could they proclaim new holidays? And I think the Gemara is not based on a halacha. The Gemara is talking from a psychological perspective. The Gemara is saying that if they felt the need to proclaim that all the old holidays should not be observed anymore, it showed the sadness that overtook them at the time of the Churban. They felt, how can we celebrate when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed? And if they had that attitude, they certainly would not have instituted new holidays. But whether correctly or not correctly, with the passage of time, we get used to things. We never get used to the idea. We actually certainly should not get used to the idea of Golus. And we have to feel sadness when we think about what we lost. But at a certain point, we have to deal with reality. And the impact that it has upon us is not the same impact that it had on the people that saw the Beis Hamikdash in its glory, or even the few generations afterwards, who heard from their parents and their grandparents about the glory of the Beis Hamikdash. Time does not heal all wounds, but it does have a tendency to lessen the pain of many of the wounds. And it could be that the Gemara just means to say those earlier generations they couldn't celebrate. But the later generations, or when there was a special reason why, besides the reason of the miracle. So that holiday they could have instituted and could have accepted. And I think this needs to be explained. Now, this week's Edra discusses the mitzvah of Sfiras Omer. And one of the questions is, why don't we make Shehechiyanu? I've mentioned this before. Why don't we make Shehechiyanu on the mitzvah of Sfiras Omer? We light Chanukah candles the first night, we make Shehechiyanu. We blow shofar, we say Shehechiyanu. Almost all mitzvahs, when we do it the first time, we make a bracha of Shehechiyanu. Lulav, we make Shehechiyanu. So why is it that on Sfiras Omer we don't say Shehechiyanu? And the reason, the Baal Amor is the first one to raise, I shouldn't say the first one, but he asks that question. And he gives two answers, but one answer is like this. Shehechiyanu is only made on a mitzvah where one has hana. One has benefit, enjoyment. He says, let's say Pidyon HaBen, because Pidyon HaBen is done after a boy is 30 days old. So when a child is 30 days old, live for 30 days, he's Yotzei Mechal Neifel, he's assumed to be a viable child. So because of that, the mitzvah of Pidyon HaBen has a bracha of Shehechiyanu, because that mitzvah is a time of joy. He says shofar. Shofar is a mitzvah of joy also. Some people would be somewhat upset with that. But shofar, because we have faith. When we hear the sound of the shofar, and the Rashba says this also, we have faith that when we hear the sound of the shofar, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to forgive our sins. As we enter the Aseres Yemei Tshuva, the 10 days of repentance, and so on and so forth. He says, but Sfiras Omer is not identified with hana, with pleasure, with happiness. And then he adds a point, and even more than that he adds. He says, Sfiras Omer, on the contrary, it makes us sad. Because when we count Sfiras Omer, we remember the Beis HaMikdash, we remember the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. It's Zeichel HaMikdash. It reminds us of the Beis HaMikdash. And we see the Beis HaMikdash destroyed. And we're overcome with sadness. And we can't say Shehechiyanu in a time of sadness. That was the answer that the Baal Hamor gave. And the question is, we have another mitzvah, that Zeichel HaMikdash, that reminds us of the Beis HaMikdash. And that's the mitzvah of Lulav. And in regard to Lulav, the halacha is, well, the first day, the mitzvah of Lulav is a d'oraisa, it's a biblical mitzvah, wherever you are. But on the other days of Sukkot, the mitzvah of shaking the lulav, that is biblical mitzvah only if you are in Yerushalayim or in the Beis Hamikdash in the temple. But outside the temple, after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, the shaking of the lulav is only a rabbinic. And it was instituted Zeichel HaMikdash. It was instituted to remember the Beis Hamikdash. Now let's say somebody forgets or did not have a lulav on the first day, and he takes the lulav on the second day for the first time, or on the third day for the first time. So he makes Shehechiyanu then. But on the second and third day, the lulav outside the Beis Hamikdash, after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, is only Zeichel HaMikdash. It reminds us of the Beis Hamikdash of old, the Beis Hamikdash that is now destroyed, that lays in ruins. And worse than that in our day, that it has a mosque on it. So how is it that we'll make Shehechiyanu? If somebody did not take a lulav the first day, he'll make Shehechiyanu on the second day or on the third day. But it's Zeichel HaMikdash. It's only to remind us about the Beis Hamikdash. We should be overcome with sadness, just like we are when we count Sfiras Omer. This is the question against the Baal HaMor. But it's interesting, according to the Baal HaMor, and I think I saw this in my uncle's name. According to the Baal HaMor, there's an altogether different approach. There is Avelis, there is mourning during the Sphira period. Many say it's because of the students of Rabbi Akiva who died during this period of time. But according to the Baal HaMor, my uncle suggested that it's a period of mourning not because of the students of Rabbi Akiva who died, and we'll get into that a little bit more soon, but it's a mourning over the Beis Hamikdash, over the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. In other words, we have 3 weeks, we have 9 days, but a custom arose among the Jewish people to mourn the loss of the Beis Hamikdash during the days of Sphira. And I want to try to understand, why is it specifically that these are days of mourning? The days, and we have to, we have to answer as to why there's a difference between Lulav and Sfiras Omer. And it's very interesting that seemingly the Tosfos in Megillah suggests, without discussing the question of Shehechiyanu, that there is a difference between Lulav and Sfiras Omer. Tosfos in Megillah says that a person who counts Sfiras Omer, after he counts the Sfiras Omer, now we don't have exactly that custom, but he should say, Yiratzon l'fanecha Hashem Elokeinu v'kei b'seinu, she'yabana beis hamikdash b'meher b'yameinu v'sein chalkeinu v'sarosecha, the Yiratzon that we recite after Shmoneh Esrei. We ask God that it should be His will that the Beis Hamikdash should be rebuilt, and we should do the service for Him there. Why? Because it's Zeicher LeMikdash. It reminds us about the Mikdash. And he says, as opposed to Lulav, He says, Lulav is an action. So we don't say the Hiratzon with the Lulav. But by Sfiras Omer, we have to say Hiratzon. We don't say Hiratzon. We say Harachman hu yachzil lanu es beis hamikdash avodas beis hamikdash l'mkomo. We should read the service of the beis hamikdash should be returned to its place. But it's the same idea. There are differences. I don't want to go into it now. So the question is, what does it mean? It's a maisa. You know, you take a lulav, you shake it. So therefore, we don't say harachaman. Therefore, we don't say hiratzon. What does it mean? And my uncle said that there are certain mitzvahs. This is the way I understand what my uncle said. That the reason for the mitzvah is Zeichel HaMikdash. But focusing on the Beis HaMikdash is not part and parcel of the mitzvah itself. Whereas there are certain mitzvahs that the reason we do it is in order to remember the Beis HaMikdash. That's part and parcel of the Beis HaMikdash. It could be that according to Tosfos and according to the Baal HaMor, if somebody will count Sphira and not think about the Churban, about the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, he might not even fulfill the mitzvah. Sfiras HaOmer, it's not a mitzvah of Sfiras HaOmer. It's a mitzvah of reminding us about the Churban, about the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash through the counting of the Sphira. Whereas when it comes to Lulav, yes, the reason they instituted is to remember the Beis HaMikdash, but that was only the reason for the law. The law is a mitzvah of Lulav. It's a mitzvah of taking the Lulav everywhere. So that's perhaps what he means. But then the question arises, why is there a difference? Why is there a difference between Sphira and Lulav? Why is there a difference between Sphira and Lulav? Why is it that one is a separate mitzvah and one is a mitzvah of remembering the Churban, of remembering the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash? Why is it that way? Now, my uncle suggested a pshat why we don't say Shechianu, which was different than the Baal HaMor. But I think the logic of my uncle's answer, and the same answer is given by the Akedas Yitzchak, the logic is the same. The mitzvah of Sfiras Omer, according to the Medrash, and even the Rambam mentions something similar, is based on the fact that when the Jewish people left Egypt, they asked Moshe Rabbeinu, where are we going? And Moshe said, we're going to Mount Sinai. And God is going to give us the Torah there. God is going to appear to us. God will reveal himself to the Jewish people. They asked Moshe, when will that be? And Moshe said, in 50 days. And because of that, the Jewish people started counting the days. That's the historical foundation to the mitzvah of Sfiras Omer, according to the Medrash. So he says, my uncle said, so there was a certain, Sfiras Omer is identified with a certain sense of lacking something. We're missing something. Yetzias Mitzrayim was not complete. V'lakachti eschem lilam, I'll take you as a nation. That was only completed at Mount Sinai. So they were missing something. So they counted. Why? They counted because in a sense, there was a sense of loss, not loss, they didn't have it, of not having something that they wanted and that they expected to be God's nation in the fullest sense. So, and Shehechiyanu can only be said when we reach a goal. Shehechiyanu b'kimanu v'higiyanu. We reach the goal. The day after Pesach, they did not yet reach the goal. So because of that, there is no Shehechiyanu. And in a sense, we could suggest that that's why Sfiras Omer was used to commemorate the Churban, much more so than any of the other mitzvahs. Because I always mention the Ramban. What does the Ramban say? The Ramban says that the Ramban says, Chumash Mos talks about the Exodus. It talks about Matan Torah. But the second half of Chumash Mos is an altogether different topic. It's about the Mishkan. It's about the tabernacle. Probably better off in Chumash Vayikra, even though he doesn't mention that point. What's it doing in Chumash Mos, the Ramban says? It doesn't conform to the theme of the Chumash. And the Ramban says that the purpose of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, was to take the sanctity of Har Sinai and bring it to Jerusalem. In other words, the purpose of the Mishkan, the purpose of the Beis HaMikdash was to perpetuate the experience of the giving of the Torah. In the Beis HaMikdash, you had the Luchos, you had the Ten Commandments, you had the Bezdin HaGadol, who the High Court of Israel that represented the oral tradition, who in a sense were the replacement of Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Kishim V'chad Kai. In the Beis HaMikdash, you had the Karbanos, Har Sinai. It was the place where God told Moshe, when you take the Jews out of Egypt, you will serve me at this mountain. So the Beis HaMikdash is the perpetuation of Sinai. And in a sense, when the Beis HaMikdash is taken away from us, the perpetuation of the Sinai experience is also taken away from us. So these days where the Jewish people sense the not having of Sinai, these are days that were chosen, according to the Baal Mor, as days of mourning for the Beis HaMikdash, because there's a sense of being deprived of something, of not having the perpetuation of Sinai. These were days that the Jews felt sadness over not yet having Sinai. So that's why Sfiras Omer is identified with the Churban. That's why it's Zeichel Churban, reminds us of the Churban. Whereas Lulav, on the contrary, Usmachtam L'fnei Hashem. There was a time when you went to the Beis HaMikdash, and that's where you felt closest to God. The Chachamim said to remember the Beis HaMikdash. To a certain degree, you could re-experience that to a much lesser degree, wherever you are. It could be a smachtam b'nei Hashem wherever you are. It's identified, on the contrary, with simcha, with joy. Therefore, you can make shehechiyanu on over the lulav. And however, so the idea is that the Sfiras Omer is identified with this feeling of not having something. In a certain sense, there's a certain sadness attached to it when we re-experience the counting of the Jewish people in the Midbar, the counting of the Jewish people in the desert. But from the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, it seems the very opposite. The Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim says that the why do we count Sfira? He says because the Jewish people, when they left Egypt, were anticipating the getting of the Torah. They were anticipating revelation with God. They were anticipating that experience. V'lakachti estem lilam, I will take you from me as a nation. On the contrary, according to the Rambam, Sfiras Omer is a very happy mitzvah. It reminds us, yeah, we were not at Har Sinai yet, but there was excitement. We're looking forward to it. Obviously, the question is, why don't we make Shechianu according to the Rambam? I don't think it has to do, as my uncle says, with historical fact, according to the Rambam. But I think what it has to do with, because in its essence, Sfiras Omer is we're counting the days from Pesach till Shavuos. In this very year, when we say we're counting the days, that means we did not reach the goal. Not that we didn't reach the goal of Matan Torah. We didn't reach the goal of Shavuos this year. It's not about what happened thousands of years ago. And V'higianu, and we reached Lazman Hazeh, means we reached the goal. Consequently, there is no Shechianu, even according to the Rambam Shita. Now, so according to the Rambam, Sfira is a positive thing. We have a machlokus. According to the Baal HaMor, Sfira commemorates this feeling of lacking something, whereas according to the Rambam, it commemorates anticipation and looking forward. Now, the second reason given for the Beilis, the mourning, is the death of the students of Rabbi Akiva. And it would seem that this is my father would say that is also Zeicher L'Churban. Even though Rabbi Akiva's students died, many years afterwards, it's possible. My father didn't explain why, but it's possible that he felt he was saying it on the basis of the Geras Rav Shririr going. They died b'shmada. They died b'shmad. They were killed by the Romans. What Rav Shririr going does with the Gemara, I don't know. But we could suggest more than that, based on something along those lines, based on something that my uncle said regarding the Kinnis. He said that initially the Romans were not so interested in wiping out the Chachamim, the Talmidei Chachamim, because the Romans were only concerned about the civil leaders of the Jewish people. They didn't feel threatened by the religious leaders, they saw them as teachers, not as leaders. And they probably thought that with the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, the whole religious structure of the Jewish people would crumble by itself. They didn't feel a need to go against the Chachamim. But as time went on, They saw that the Chachamim were the true leaders, the Torah leaders of the Jewish people were the real leaders of the Jewish people. And in a sense, they turned their arrows against the Chachamim as well. And so, in a sense, if we say like that they died b'shmada, that they died in shmad, so this was a continuation of the process of the Churban. And we could say also that even if it was that they died as a result of the disease, but in a sense, HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not interfere with the plague that in a sense was an aid to the Romans in getting rid of the Chachamim, of the future Chachamim of the Jewish people who would be its future leadership. So it appeared in a sense, there was a sense of panicking. When this was taking place, there was depression. Who is going to be our leaders? Who is going to teach us Torah? In a sense, the destruction that began with the Beis Hamikdash continued and raised concern about the future of Torah and about the future of the Jewish people. And so in a sense, the end of the death of the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva. So how can we understand it? But I think we can understand it in the following manner. When we observe days of mourning as a result of the death of the students of Rabbi Akiva, so in a sense, we are re-experiencing those situations. As a matter of fact, there's opinion brought down in Shulchan Aruch that one shouldn't do work at night, of the nights of Sfiras Omer. Why? Because at night they used to take out the bodies of the students of Rabbi Akiva and bury them. So in a sense, the idea behind the Aveilus of Sfiras Omer is to re-experience that situation. So in a sense, when we re-experience that situation, we are overcome by sadness. And when we have sadness because of the loss, begin to lose hope. We are overcome with depression. Now the question is, why do we celebrate when the students of Rabbi Akiva stopped dying? They all died. If you could say the Magefa, the plague ended right away, and there were many students left over, we can understand perhaps the reason for the celebration. What's the reason for the celebration when they all died? The only reason they stopped dying is they were all dead. But the answer is very simple. The answer is we are not celebrating the end of the death of the students of Rabbi Akiva. We are celebrating that we are no longer in a state of depression. Sometimes when one confronts tragedy, they're not able to rise from that tragedy. And because of that, they're not able to accomplish, they're not able to do anything. And that is the challenge of Golos, the challenge of exile. Yes, we are sad. The Beis Hamikdash is destroyed. But that doesn't mean that we can't accomplish, that we can't do. Talmud Bavli was made in darkness, the Gemara tells us. But Talmud Bavli was the biggest light to the Jewish people, the biggest accomplishment for generations that kept the Jewish people alive. We are not celebrating the end of the death. We are celebrating that we were able to continue afterwards, that we did not give up hope. And as the Gemara tells us, that Rabbi Akiva didn't say, but that, what can I do? All my students were killed. He went out and started again. He continued again. My uncle always mentions the Medrash says that God created many worlds and they did not find favor in his eyes. So he destroyed them until this world came, which found favor in his eyes. So the question is, so why did he create the old worlds? My uncle said the reason was because there's a mitzvah halachta b'drachav. We have to use God as our guide. We have to follow his path, his pattern. Sometimes we put a lot of work into something and it crumbles, it's destroyed. But we can't give up. We have to persevere. And I think that's the holiday of Lag Bomer. The holiday of Lag Bomer is the realization that the Jewish people were able to emerge from that sense of depression as a nation. And Torah continued, and the Jewish people continued. And Rabbi Akiva himself is the eternal optimist. Rabbi Akiva and his colleagues, they go to Jerusalem and they see a fox going out of the Kodesh Kodashim of the Holy of Holies. And all of them are upset and crying. Rabbi Akiva Mitzachek, Rabbi Akiva is happy. He taught Kriya, but he was happy. And they said, Rabbi Akiva, why are you happy? He said, because I am sure now that the Beis Hamikdash is going to be rebuilt. I don't want to go into the details how he was sure, but I think what it amounts to is, Yeshu Skenim Skenos B'Yerushalayim. He saw that the Beis Hamikdash became completely desolate. The plan of the Romans failed. They thought they'll destroy the Beis Hamikdash, they'll destroy Torah, they'll destroy the Jewish people. But the Jewish people survived anyway. Says, so I know there will become a time, until people live long lives in Jerusalem. And this is what the holiday of Lag Bomer is. The holiday of Lag Bomer is not that the end of the death, but that the impact, the depression at the end of the death did not destroy us emotionally. We were able to continue and persevere as a nation, and that the Torah, the perpetuation of Torah, was able to continue as a nation. And Lag Bomer reminds us that there is hope. And that's why, what do we say? We say, Hiratz, according to Tosfos, Shibana Beis Mikdash B'mheira B'yameinu, B'sein Chalkenu B'sarasecha. The Balamor says that it's days of mourning. Tosfos, I don't think, agrees with the Balamor. The Balamor says it's days of anticipation. Just like the Rambam says, at the time of the Jewish people going to the desert, they were anticipating the getting of the Torah. So we are anticipating the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash, b'mheira b'yameinu. And this is what Lag Bomer is all about. It's anticipation and looking forward. We're looking forward to the coming of Mashiach. Mashiach can come in any day and any moment. And we look forward to that moment being very soon.
Everyone put questions in the chat. Did when you were young, did your yeshiva take you outside to play around outside on Lag BaOmer?
I marched in the Lubavitcher parade on Lag BaOmer as a boy with a sign, SOS, save our Shabbos. On Eastern Parkway.
Anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat. Why were Rabbi Akiva students dying? Because part of it depends on the
What?
Why did the students of Rabbi Akiva die? Because part
Okay,
of
so the Gemara says because the lo nagu kavod zeh b'zeh. They didn't teach, they didn't show respect to one another.